Beautiful. So my name is Lucy Wainright, and can you tell them what your name is?
My name is Bob Murphy.
Okay. And I'm going to be interviewing Bob about basically changes in the environment over the years, changes in nature, and changes in activism. So can you tell me what nature was like when you were younger?
I think nature was much friendlier than it is now, despite all of our efforts to help nature along. Sometimes our efforts are misguided, but that doesn't mean we should not do them. For example, it was not wrong to have fruit trees in your yard. Today, we say that's too messy, we can't do that. So we go ahead and buy it all from a store. Good example, in my grandparents' yard, there were 2 cherry trees, a peach tree, pear tree, and an apple tree. And in my day, even though it was my grandparents, I did most of the picking of the fruits, and my mother canned them all for the winter. Canning is a lost art today. It saves lots of money. You want to try it?
Was there a lot of activism when you were younger? Are there a lot of groups that are constantly trying to save the planet, or?
No, I'm not aware of any. That came much later. Understand that I was born at the beginning of World War II. When the war was finally over, we went to war in Korea. By the late 1950s, our country was worn out with wars, and we stopped. So that in the 60s, when we went to Vietnam, that's when activism began. The anger, the upset, the change in society, the unclear motivation, which President Johnson finally said he didn't know why we were there either. In my first year of teaching high school in the early 60s, I had a student I will not name, even though I remember his name, who was a junior in a public high, and he did not like school, and he didn't want to be there. So he lied about his age and joined the Army, and he went to Vietnam, and he was killed within a month. And so his face is constantly with me as the face of a person whose life was ruined and he never had a chance. On a more humorous note, during that time at Purdue University, there were some of us who did our, quote, protest, unquote, of the Vietnam War at Ross-Ade Stadium, the football stadium. Well, as you can see, I have a beard, but at that time it was red because of my Irish lineage. My hair was red. It no longer is, if you haven't noticed. Okay. We stood outside, we being lots of people, stood outside the stadium passing out flyers to stop the war. I still chuckle at this. Some man walked up to me and said, "Why don't you shave off that beard?" And being a young smart aleck, I said, "Will that stop the war?" And of course he clobbered me and I fell down. But I learned that shaving my beard would probably not stop the war. Okay. A couple of years later, when the war did end, I lived in Denver, Colorado at the time. And on the Memorial Day, Denver had, maybe it still does, a very big military parade for Memorial Day. Military meaning soldiers and sailors and retired people. I don't mean ammunition and so on. But down the boulevard, as the parade approached where I was standing, people were commenting and there was a low murmur going on. And no one knew what that was, but it got as the parade moved towards where we were standing, it got more and more quiet. And I thought, what's this about? The Vietnam veterans were marching. At that time, nobody knew what to do with them. The veterans were treated worse than any other veterans in the history of our country.
Mm-hmm.
It was like it was their fault. Well, we had lost a war for the first time. And so as they began marching by, people just stopped applauding and clapping and talking. And one of the things that I did that I'm most proud of is, even though I was against the war, these are people, and they gave their lives. So I walked out into the street and started clapping, and everybody else started clapping then. It was like, it's okay, you can clap now. But activism in those days was not splintered into all those little groups of people who come up with something. Activism in those days was actually meant to be for the good of the majority, not for the interest of a little minority of some kind or other.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, too, I think our education system began to break down. As a teacher, I saw it happen. Now, to explain that doesn't mean it was all bad. Some change was certainly needed, but we gave in. For example, by the end of the 60s and the early 70s, we no longer asked students to memorize anything because it might hurt their feelings. Well, go ahead, hurt your feelings. Some people can memorize, some can't. Some can play the piano and some can't. Mm-hmm. And that's just the way things are.
So there really wasn't any natural activism, and there really wasn't any care about sea turtles and straws or plastic in landfills or pollution or anything like that?
Not really.
Okay. What was something completely different in nature than now?
In nature?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's when we began the, can't think what it's called, I'm sorry. The day we all plant a tree, Arbor Day or something.
Oh, Earth Day.
Yeah, okay, that began then. And that was a good thing. I'm trying to think. That's when we began to discover the danger in such things as some pesticides
mm-hmm.
and some methods of farming that could be improved, and often were. By that I mean animals were kept a little cleaner than they were before.
Gotcha.
And perhaps fed better. And if you out there on the camera are listening, that's my great-grandson making a comment on this situation. But at the same time, farmers began to disappear. And it was not looked upon as a worthwhile profession.
Mm-hmm.
We were all supposed to be college graduates to save the world. Well, that doesn't work either.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, to wrap this up, is there anything you wish the world was better at doing back then? That maybe they do better today, or?
Yes. I wish we had been able to understand other people's beliefs and motivations, and not just assume that because they were different than ours, they must be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're not.
All right, and then lastly, is there something that you wish in terms of nature that the world could do better? Maybe even today, or especially back then?
In nature?
Mm-hmm.
I think we've done a pretty good job of cleaning up the world in nature, meaning giving trees and the necessary plants room to grow. But at the same time, I think we're gone too far with they have to be pretty. They don't have to be pretty to be useful to nature. When they drop their leaves, it's almost like it's a sin to drop their leaves because we have to hurry and pick them up and get rid of them in a hurry. Leaves are Mother Nature's way of replenishing the soil, and we should leave them alone.
I agree. All right, well, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome.